Okay, better look into this statement. Again, we need to tell whether it is true, false, or uncertain. This is saying in practice, two variable regression model is useless because the behavior of dependent variable can never be explained by a single explanatory variable. Well, do we, in this case, I won't say that this is true. I won't say it is false. I will say it is uncertain statement. The answer is that sometimes it may be true and sometimes it may be false, right? So a lot of times there exists regression equation which can simply be explained through one variable, right? So for example, I can go ahead and I can say that consumption is a function of disposable income. Now in this case, what happens is, even though my R square may come approximately say 0.89, then what would this mean, beta? It would mean that there is 89% of variation in consumption that can be explained due to income, right? So if suppose R square comes out to be 0.89, so I am saying 89% of variation in consumption can be explained due to variation in income. Now you may want to go ahead and argue with me that, ma'am, you know what? There is an extra variable of wealth or the assets of parents which may affect my consumption. Well, it may. But a lot of times what we want to do is we want to keep the model simple, right? And let's say that suppose adding the wealth or the asset variable, suppose when I add wealth and asset variable, it does increase the amount of variation I can explain in consumption, right? Suppose the amount of variation explained in consumption increases to 92%. But the question is it worth making the model so complicated that I include two more variables just to increase 3% more variation, explained variation in consumption? Or should I just assume these to be part of my error term, right? So a lot of times what happens is that, and you will understand this with time when you go to multiple regression model, a lot of times we don't want to include extra variable and we want to keep the model simple if majority of variation can be explained through this variable. We don't want to include new variables just to increase the explanation by a little more amount. मतलब अगर मुझे ये समझ में आ रहा है कि किसी की भी इनकम 89% तब बढ़ती है जब किसी की भी कंजम्पशन 89% तब बढ़ती है जब इनकम बढ़ती है. If I am able to understand that 89% of variation in consumption is due to income, then I very well don't want to explain the remaining 11% a lot of times because it may mean making the model very complicated, right? So for example, consumption can be a function of psychological impact, some psychological variable. And this psychological variable can be very difficult to calculate, right? So I don't want to put a lot of my time and effort in calculating this psychological variable and making my model complicated when I can actually work with an easier model, right? So that is why we can go ahead and we can say that, yes, sometimes working with a single variable is better. But sometimes it becomes of utmost importance to include an additional variable, right? For example, we know, right, that GDP is not just defined by one thing. GDP may be a function of a lot of things, right? So I, for example, know that if Y represents GDP, it is a function of consumption, investment, net exports, government expenditure, etc. Right? So here it is compulsory for me to include multiple variables. Whereas in this case, it is not much compulsory for me to include a lot of variables and income may suffice, right? So we may not just say that always that, one variable is enough. And we may not say always that more than one variable is enough. It depends from model to model. So it's neither always true nor always false. Okay.